Deshaun Foster's team doesn't look like they're going bowling after their Week 1 victory. But here's what they can fix to ensure they have a chance.
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Locked On UCLA Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson Yoxheimer. Thanks for making this show your first listen each and every day. It's your team every day. It's free wherever you get your podcasts, and it's available on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for your support. This episode is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. It fixes tired fast. Zero sugar. It's convenient, portable size. A perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done. Go to 5hourenergy.com. Use the Locked On CFB as your code to get 20% off your order. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. Where we get started today is the fact that UCLA did not look impressive. They don't look like a bowling team. Heck, they seem like they might fall well short of the preseason over-under win total of 4.5, which I think was as high as 5.5 at some point. Makes them a borderline bowl team. Now, they look fairly similar to a 3-9, 2-10, maybe a 1-11 team, all right? UCLA struggled, but they found a way to get the job done. And as we like to do after each game for UCLA, we give our grades and we give our reactions and potential fixes to this UCLA team. Because the best thing about Week 1 is you get to overreact to what happened in UCLA. They, quite frankly, did not look impressive in that 16-13 game. So much so that I saw similar sentiments when it came to predicting the score across social media for UCLA fans. So I was in the same boat. So don't act like we all didn't expect the same thing for a UCLA. Yes, I'm going to come out with it. We're going to put this on the screen. If it wants to work for me right now, there you go. I expected UCLA. If you're watching on YouTube, you see this already. If you're listening, UCLA, I expected 42-24. I expected, some ridiculous offensive explosions. And that's not what happened. So where we're going to start today is analyzing the struggles of the offense, right? And I want to parallel to their game last year against Coastal Carolina, which was a different regime, the Chip Kelly regime. But the difference is not really a lot of difference between the numbers between these two teams, right? Specifically Garbers. What did Garbers do? He came out, looked shaky, an offensive line that was all right. But as much as UCLA's offensive line was not good last year, they only gave up 1 sack against Coastal Carolina. And while they looked slightly improved in the pass game and pass blocking, they only gave up 1 sack against Ethan Garbers, and yet they still had him in moments under duress looking for receivers. So let's look at, I'm going to tell you what Garbers' stat line was in this game. Remember, last year he played like a half of football, 2.5 quarters, and he had to rotate with Dante. So if you think about it, you add some numbers in, he probably has almost equivalent numbers overall. So Garbers, 50% completion rate, right? 19 for 38, 272 yards, a touchdown and 2 picks, a QBR under 40. That's not going to cut it, but UCLA won a game on the road, and he led a game-winning drive down late in the fourth quarter, which once UCLA got that stop against Hawaii, seemed very certain that UCLA would get that win. Now, looking at the game versus Coastal Carolina, this is what Ethan Garbers did last year as the very questioned starter because of Chip Kelly's inability to choose 1 out of 3. So for Ethan Garbers in Week 1 in 2023, Garbers, 10 of 17, close to 50%, 120 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. That's the same guy who went on a run at the end of last year but got benched because Dante threw a better ball and they did a better play-action bomb and he threw for a touchdown. That's exactly what UCLA did to start the second half against Hawaii with the play-action bomb to Rico Flores Jr., who took the mantle of leading receiver, big play guy from J. Michael Sertivant, the guy who this year had the 100-yard game, 3 catches and a touchdown in the opener. Somewhat similar to what J. Michael did last year. All right? So there is some hope that he threw a deep ball. The UCLA offense looked much, much better in the second half because they went down and they scored. They had all their scoring drives in the second half, right? They had their 3 field goals and a touchdown. So 4 separate scoring drives in the second half. And UCLA, remember, they were trailing late in that game against Coastal Carolina. a game in which they were down, it was a battle. It was, I believe, 14-13 heading into the fourth, so maybe not trailing, but they were up a point. It was in the balance late against Coastal Carolina, who did do good things in their conference year, and they had Grayson McCall, yes. But what UCLA did offensively, you look at the quarterback, shaky, okay. Then you had an offensive line that's somewhat protected, but the glaring difference, you can see the difference in the coaching staffs here right now, right? You can see where UCLA with a very similar offensive line, literally 2 of the 3 same tailbacks as last year, including TJ Harden, who was the leading rusher for UCLA, couldn't do anything against Hawaii. That was the glaring thing that sucked for the Bruins in this game against Hawaii. All right. So going back to one of the keys was the O-line must step up. Well, they only allowed 1 sack. They gave Garbers some time. And while he was under duress when he threw one of those picks, which looked horrible, all right, and then the other end zone interception looked horrible, there is like, okay, Garbers had a similar awful week 1 last year with worse decision-making in this game than I think he made last year, but sometimes it had to do with him forcing a play. He did that last year. And the offensive line giving out. Garbers, in a situation, if he wasn't in the end zone, wouldn't throw that play. It unfortunately cost UCLA 3 points and could have cost them a total of 7. UCLA lucked out. So the offensive line did not look impressive. Mind you, they got Unijay hurt. DeGiorgio didn't play, so they're down 2 starting tackles. They're trying to move Carlin into a new position as a starting center. And it was a heavy battle for the starting right guard position with Makaheli, the UNLV transfer. And sometimes when coaches say jobs are up for grabs, it means nobody's really pulled away. And UCLA struggled in their offensive line, down a couple of tackles, a couple of injuries, although I think Deshaun Foster noted that those guys might be back moving forward. And then the running game was non-existent. If you take away Ethan Garbers scrambling, which I didn't have on my bingo card when you got Keegan Jones, who had more rushing yards than TJ Harden, in a game where Harden had 9 carries for 9 yards with a long of 7. And you had Garbers who had 7 carries for 47 yards. Jones, 3 carries for 13. And multiple times, UCLA got blown up in the backfield. So frustrating against this Hawaii front, which had 6 tackles for loss. It felt like they had so many more, and they just kept UCLA shut down at the line of attack, at the line of scrimmage. The point of attack, line of scrimmage. It was frustrating to see. But they only got 1 sack. Positive, but a lot of negatives in the running game. When you look to what UCLA was able to do under Chip Kelly, similar offensive line, maybe not down 2 tackles like they were week 1 this year. Same running back, same starting quarterback. UCLA was able to rush for 150 yards, something like that, right, last year? Because both Carson Steele and Harden each had 70-plus yards, over 5 yards a carry, basically, against the Chanticleers last year as the 2 leading rushers. That is the scary part, that UCLA couldn't run the ball in Hawaii. And for that, and for some poor decisions by Garbers, the inability to really change things up early in the game when it came to play calling gives UCLA, I would think, an offense that we all were excited about, highly touted about for week 1, a D-plus performance. I can't say it's any more exciting than a poor offense years ago from the early 2000s with what UCLA had. That's a D-plus performance. It's not passing. They did enough to win, all right? But UCLA has to do a lot more if they want to become a bowl-eligible team. A D-plus performance in offense. Garbers figured it out. The second half switches, they went down, they scored, and this doesn't count because special teams were going to have its own grade. So Bagani, who led the team in scoring in this opportunity, yes. But there's multiple times where we're debating Deshaun Foster being conservative on some of his 4th down decisions because we didn't trust the offensive line or the decision-making of Garbers. And large in part, yes, they missed a field goal. They were a little questionable. It's because their offense didn't give a lot of reason to be successful. It's like, we're going to go for it. We're going to get it. Chip Kelly would just gone for it. All right. Deshaun Foster's kind of balancing. We're not looking good right now. Do I want to go for it? Which, yes, you want to be very decisive as a first-time head coach, right? And someone with no experience, that's where you wonder and you look. But that was a hard game to decide to be aggressive in a game where you're favored by 2 scores and your team's down because of a mistake on special teams, which is large in part a head coach's and a special teams coordinator's responsibility, which we'll talk about next. Because the offense D+, but Garbers had similar numbers to last year, and then went on the big streak at the end of the year. Think about how he did it in this second half. Figured it out, played a lot better, ran, completed more passes, found Sturdivant, found Flores for the big touchdown catch. And just like how he finished the end of the year in 23 on a hot streak, obviously they didn't win this game by 2 scores, but it was clear they're going to win, and the offense was going to go down and score, whether it was a field goal or a touchdown, in this case a field goal for UCLA to win the game against Hawaii. Important. Very, very important. All right, next we talk the defense and the special teams and some possible fixes. I was surprised. We're good. We'll talk about that next. Well, were you tired watching all those games on Saturday into the weekend, into now the Monday? Well, 5-Hour Energy fixes tired fast. Whether it's a long list to do for work or a long list of watch for games, 5-Hour Energy has a 5-Hour Energy shot. You can take and check everything off your list, whether it's watching games, DIY projects, or more. And, what you need to do when you get the supplies and need the energy, you take a 5-Hour Energy shot. It's got 0 sugar. It's convenient. It's portable, so maybe you need it on the go. Take one of those with you, and it's a perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done. And you can build your own 12 packs, 24 packs with flavors like watermelon, tropical burst, grape, and more. Try all the flavors. There's one for everybody, and you can have it delivered right to your door. All you got to do is go to 5hourenergy.com. That's the number 5, hourenergy.com, and get 5-Hour Energy products today. Use the code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. The offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. And it's not good on subscription orders. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. All right, here we go. Second segment, we're focusing on defense and special teams. The offense drew the ire of everybody in the UCLA community. It was frustrating to see. We could see how Chip Kelly was able to run the ball, but how he also left the team in ruins because of the lack of recruiting on the offensive line, the lack of gathering talent over years. So you can see how Chip Kelly maximized that, but also let the future regime down to failure when it came to offense. You can see the difference between Bieniemy and Kelly, and the only thing we're going to find out offensively is how how Bieniemy can adapt, which is what Chip Kelly did not do very well in 23. Defensively, though, we're left with UCLA's 4th defensive coordinator in 4 seasons, all right, from 21 to 24. And yes, I think we're all worried as UCLA fans. You're going to see another Mountain West quarterback hobbling down for a final drive with like 10 seconds left to break UCLA hearts, like Jake Haener of Fresno State back in 21. UCLA in a prevent defense, you're like, oh, they should win this game. Braden Shager, we talk about him. He was clearly hobbling up and down the field. Their best receiver had a messed up finger, and UCLA was able to get the job done. All right. So they did not allow a Jake Haener-esque miraculous finish down the stretch. They finished it. And what's tough to judge about this Hawaii performance, if this was week 1 for Hawaii, you'd almost give them more credit. I think UCLA would be like, okay, maybe Hawaii's good this year. But we just don't know about Hawaii because they struggled so much in poor weather against a Delaware State team who, by all accounts, was downright awful in 23. And Hawaii struggled with them to open. But the reason for optimism for this UCLA team is because Hawaii came out and played so much better in week 2. Week 1, I guess week 2 for them, week 1 overall in the college football season, and nearly took down UCLA after playing atrociously the week before against a clearly inferior opponent. So that is the hope for UCLA going forward, to play much better, use the bye week to the advantage, and know, all right, this is what we need to fix, and how can we hide some glaring weaknesses? Right now, the run game in this West Coast offense. Clearly, Garbers' decision-making. But what was not a weakness was the defense, okay? So the defense is somewhat tied into special teams. The only touchdown scored by Hawaii came off of the early mistake on special teams, which will receive its own grade. UCLA, over the next 3 quarters, gave up yards, Hawaii was able to get down the field a little bit, but they only scored 6 points on 2 field goals, including 0 in the fourth quarter. That is how you stamp your way to victory when UCLA was trailing heading into the fourth, stopped multiple Rainbow Warrior drives, including when UCLA was trailing, when they were tied, and when the Bruins had the lead. That's the hallmark of a good defensive performance in week one. Okay? As much as being made of Danton Lynn taking the DBs like Kamari Ramsey to USC, as much as Latu, Jones Jr., the Murphy twins forced a lot of pressure, forced a lot of turnovers in 23, Kaika Malloy was able to dial up some pressure, take advantage of a quarterback whose mobility was somewhat limited in the second half, with a run-and-shoot offense which is designed to get the ball out quick, and UCLA still racked up 5 sacks. 5 sacks with a team where the question was, how are they going to generate pressure? How are they going to stop the opposition with a newly reworked secondary? This is how UCLA, this is their final numbers against Shager, who is a highly proclaimed quarterback. He led them out in West in numbers, offensively, yards, right? In this type of offense, you're going to have a Hawaii quarterback do that because they're going to throw and throw and throw. UCLA sacked Shager 5 times, including a big one late in the game that sealed the deal, including a KJ Wallace blitz, and like Cajo start with the sack. You got Busick, you had Henderson off the edge, and Keanu Williams. So it was a mix and match between bringing pressure from the secondary coming off the edge, and then your D linemen winning some battles, which is tough when the quarterback's getting the ball out in a few seconds, right? It's not like a typical offense where UCLA is going to see later in the season, quarterback step back to pass, has time to throw. UCLA generated pressure against an offense that is in the run and shoot, going to get the ball out quick. That's what they're designed to do. In addition, Hawaii, which ran for 51 yards, but if you take away the negative 13 added because of Shager's lost yardage due to sacks, they had close to 70 yards rushing. So they're somewhat similar to UCLA running the ball if you take out the sacks. The Bruins, though, did have 11 tackles for loss. So in addition to the sacks, 6 more plays that led to tackles for loss for the Bruins. Swessinger, Madrano. You had Oladejo there. So UCLA, with the D-line, that was one of the first keys of the game for me. They made plays, helped out with well-timed pressure brought by Kaika Malloy. I wasn't sure if they were going to do it. They brought the pressure. The D-line won some battles, and they forced negative plays from the Rainbow Warriors when they were trying to change things up. They didn't get beat necessarily on a draw play or an unexpected run play too often. Now, we'll find out the physicality of this defense moving forward when they play just simply by playing Indiana. And then we'll find the physicality of when they play LSU in week 4. We'll find it out. But we weren't going to find out the physicality of how they defended the run game in week 1. But they handled a somewhat mobile quarterback, although Shager was lifted. He was clearly banged up, wearing the sleeve over his leg, getting tripped up, rolled up on. Hawaii's best receiver, once he messed up his finger on one of his hands, clearly had a tough time catching some of the balls. But then the other thing is the secondary. 7 passes defended, right? And when it comes to the turnover luck, and I was reading about it, how Bill Connolly was talking about, 1 to every 4 passes defended, pass breakups, can lead to an interception, right? So 1 out of every 1 out of every 4 pass breakups leads to a pick. Well, with UCLA getting in there, they forced 2 interceptions, dropped 1, probably had an opportunity for another one, forced a fumble, couldn't recover it, went out of bounds, and then recovered the fumble on the last play of the game, ending up winning this turnover battle +1 in a game where your quarterback threw 2 goal line interceptions, 1 at his own goal line, 1 into the end zone when UCLA was driving offensively. Okay, so UCLA was able to win the turnover battle. That's a huge step for the defense. Generate pressure, be the physical team, and make the adjustments where Hawaii scored 3 second-half points and arguably shouldn't have scored a touchdown at all because of a special teams mistake. So for the UCLA defense, based on expectations, I want to give them a B for this performance. By no means is it an A, but a B based off expectations. Now, yes, you consider the opponent, you consider the weather, you consider everything. But a B is a solid grade for this defense, which I think performed really well and surprised me. You look at last year's game against a quarterback who put up similar big numbers, like Grayson McCall, who now is the quarterback at NC State. They forced 2 interceptions. They forced, and I believe recovered a fumble. They got a little bit of pressure, and they forced a normally accurate quarterback who does not throw a lot of picks to throw picks in week 1. Shager, who threw a lot of interceptions in the early part of his Hawaii season in 23, in the back end, I think only threw 2 picks at the end of the 23 season. So that was a fairly accurate quarterback who figured out his season, figured out the run and shoot offense, and after he went to the portal and came back, had some rapport with some receivers, and UCLA was still able to force him into some poor decisions, make some plays on the ball, and they were ball hogs, right? That was key number 2, force a turnover. Well, little did I know they needed those turnovers to win the game. From the very last play of the game to picks that changed the game, they did what they needed to do. And you're not going to always rely on tip balls, but some of those interceptions were fantastic plays. And Oladejo literally had one in his hands early in the second half. If he catches that, then Hawaii has 0 points scored in the second half. That is how good the defense looked on Saturday. Now, I'm not going to say they're going to go dominate, but I think a lot of us were somewhat skeptical about how the 23 defense was going to start. We didn't know what Danton Lynn would bring. UCLA put in a solid performance. Coastal Carolina did move the ball a little bit, but the Bruins bent but did not break. And they did a lot of the same things here with Akaika Malloy, who I think did a good job with a very veteran secondary, mixing and matching the pieces he has on the D-line, and a solid linebacking core that made a few plays and just missed making even more because Medrano forced the fumble. Oladejo was right there for a pass breakup with the interception in his hands. They look good. A B for the defense, which I think is an encouraging sign with the adjustments and how dominant they were down the stretch. Dominant, not overly dominant, but they controlled the game. Special teams, Mateen Magani, the hero, man. 3 for 3, and that just makes more of an emphasis. I believe the broadcast said how bad UCLA was scoring in the red zone last year. A lot of it was because they could not make any field goals. They were 8 of 17. They missed more than 50% of their kicks. That's why Chip Kelly had to go for it so often last year, which led to some poor decision-making where if they just get points on the board, it's a difference, right? Think of LSU and USC on the Sunday night game. LSU goes for it 4th and goal instead of taking the points. And they end up losing the game by a 1-score game where they could have led and put a little bit of different pressure on our poor rivals to the other side, right? And we just say, dang it, LSU, take the points. We look at Ethan Garbers. Right after they showed the graphic of a turnover, they turned it over in the red zone and threw a lot of picks. And now you've got to be a little more conservative saying, Garbers, we got guys who can get us points on the board. Within the 40-yard range, it looks semi-automatic with our new kicker in Vigani. Now, Glessner did miss the 50-yarder, Glessner. But, hey, college kickers aren't always going to make 50-yarders, and UCLA hasn't had that as a part of their strength in recent years. And then you have the fake punts, which wasn't a fake punt. It was UCLA had 9 guys on the field, which I didn't even realize, which was a fault on Norwood, the special teams coordinator, the new special teams coordinator, and Deshaun Foster for not being on the same page. That's where the special teams coordinator needs to realize that and yell at Foster, we need a timeout right now. I'm not sure how the players didn't say we need a timeout. We got 9 guys in the field. We're about to give up a first down because there's no rush on that, and the punter ran for a first down. So when it comes to the kicking game, UCLA, Bagani, A+. We'll see how UCLA translates to 50-plus yard field goals later if it's always Glessner, but the kicking game, when it came to field goals, A+. That grade gets dragged down to a C- because of the punting game, which looked a little shaky, because of the punt coverage failing on the first drive, leading to a game-changing touchdown that had UCLA behind until the fourth quarter in the final minutes. So a C-. It passes because the field goal, was on point. The punts, yes, they had a 60-yard punt helped by a good bounce. In a punting battle, I was all right, won at the last minute for UCLA by none other than, well, they switched off between Chase Berry and Brody Richter, but it was a little shaky. It was Chase Berry who had the 60-yarder, and then UCLA ended up going with Richter a little bit later. And the punt return coverage, disastrous. That was the only mistake, and that's a week 1 mistake probably. Now I hope it gets cleaned up. So C- for special teams and a B for the defense, because there's always room for improvement. And I'm excited to see what UCLA can do. Maybe not so much pressure. Maybe they can move a lot of things. There's things to fix defensively, but I think they surprised a lot of us, including myself. Special teams, the issues were apparent. From getting in the right guys, enough guys on the field, to hopefully the punters could perform better and not rely on some bounces to go their way. And simply maybe getting a bit of a return game to help UCLA going forward, because the offense was not moving the ball. Which is why we should take a look around the Big Ten and compare UCLA's performance to the rest of the Big Ten teams here on Locked On UCLA. Hey guys, UCLA fans, Bruin fans, I want to take a moment and get you heads up about a brand new mobile game. It's Ultimate College Football Head Coach. An amazing game, a simulation where you can step into the shoes of Deshaun Foster. All those calls you're angry about him missing or not making, you can make those decisions and see if you're just as good in the pressure. You oversee the coaching staff, the training camps, handing out scholarships. Can you handle the pressure? Would you, as a head coach? Because you're responsible for calling the offensive plays. Are you better than the enemy? Your strategy is not only going to determine the success of the season, but shape the future and the legacy of your program. Ultimate College Football Head Coach, completely free, no ads, 100% playable offline. You can play it on the go, as you want, when you want to. The special offer, Locked On CFB, is a free boost inside the game to your program. Make sure you take advantage of the perk as you can get your team off to a strong start. Download the game by visiting ultimate-cfb.com or look it up in the App Store. Ultimate College Football Head Coach. Begin your coaching legacy today. So let's before we look around the Big Ten, take a look at what UCLA did when they started the Chip Kelly era, right? A lot of hope, hype coming off the Jim Mora tenure, which somewhat crashed and burned at the end of the Josh Rosen years. UCLA played Cincinnati, which was not a Power 4 team at the time. They were, they were just outside that. Although they did build into a CFP team later, UCLA was, they started against Cincinnati. They had a veteran quarterback. He got hurt, so they had to start a very young and raw DTR in that game. And Chip Kelly and UCLA, with a semi-decent schedule, lost to Cincinnati. And then, what did they get? They had a tough trip to a now, ironically, current SEC team in Oklahoma, who was a team that was expected to be a top dog. Then you had a Fresno State game. So you look at some of the non-conference games UCLA had to begin the Chip Kelly era and look at it this year, a non-Power 4 team where you expected UCLA to win, and then Cincinnati won that game. The Bruins struggled. They play Fresno State. Fresno State won that game. They play a tough team on the road, expected to be a top 15 team in the country. Not sure LSU is going to be ranked after their season opening loss, but they're pretty solid. That's a tough trip. And UCLA went 3-9. So as much as it struggled, as much as we want to point to UCLA not going to hit that 4.5 win total, there's the balance between they looked dreadful. 2-10, 3-9, 4-8 on the table. But most importantly, in the Chip Kelly era, large in part, UCLA could not often win the big game other than splitting the years with USC in the Chip Kelly era, which was one of his major successes, beating USC 3 times in 6 tries. But winning the big game, winning the game where you're struggling to come back to win, was not something UCLA could do under Chip Kelly. So you look at that opener, that was a clear indication when UCLA struggled, they didn't win. And UCLA, with a poor effort against the Hawaii team that looked dreadful week 0 and played much better week 1 on the road, UCLA got the win. That's a big indication of a strong base for UCLA's discipline, respect, enthusiasm. You look for UCLA when it came to overall discipline in this game. Hawaii was not the disciplined team. The Bruins had 6 penalties for 60 yards I believe 3 of those penalties came on one play, 2 of which were declined. Hawaii had 10 penalties for 97. So UCLA had less penalties, less yardage for penalties compared to what they had usually under Chip Kelly. So the discipline was there, other than like one play where UCLA had like 3 penalties. Okay, literally one play, all of them were like 15 yards. The discipline was there when it came to penalty yardage. Now, looking at the rest of the Big Ten, you say, man, Zach, UCLA looked pretty garbage in this game compared to what the rest of the country did. Did they? Didn't they? Well, I'm looking at the rest of the Big Ten, all right? So let's take a look at some teams UCLA is going to play this year. Rutgers, who played Howard, dominated them, but they only led 17-7 at the half against Howard before destroying them with 27 second half points. So even Rutgers, who looked good with their new quarterback, only led 17-7 with the reigning Big Ten leading rusher, right, who put up 165 yards in a tub. So they struggled in the first half. Minnesota, who played North Carolina, and their starting quarterback literally out for the year, couldn't win and set off fireworks in jubilation of their 2-point loss at home. Okay? At home with the FCS leader in passing yards, who only threw for 166 yards against North Carolina at home. And North Carolina isn't necessarily known for their defense under Mac Brown. Okay? So Minnesota lost at home, a field goal as the game came to an end that they missed under 50 yards, and their offense didn't impress, scoring 3 points after halftime, losing to North Carolina, whose quarterback was hurt early on, or was hurt now. Illinois took care of business. UCLA hasn't faced them, but they dominated Eastern Illinois. Michigan State, who's in a semi-similar boat. UCLA was, if they wanted to get rid of Chip Kelly earlier, the rumor could have been Jonathan Smith, who brought his Oregon State youngster. Didn't look too good, but they struggled with Florida Atlantic. Despite having a 16-3 lead, Michigan State, 0 points after halftime. Okay? So they struggled to the Spartans in a new era. At home against FAU. An FAU team only had 100 yards passing. Wisconsin, under Brett Bielema against Western Michigan, only led 10-7 at half, 13-7 after 3, before winning by 2 scores late at Camp Randall. And we want to talk a lot of love about Wisconsin. They rated Van Dyke much higher than Garbers, I believe, right? Or close, right? They all lump them in the same. He had 192 yards passing. Interesting. They struggled at home. Week 1 struggles. Ohio State only led 7-3 against Akron, 17-3 at the break against the Akron Zips. And then they pulled away late, blowing the brakes off them in the second half. Yes, we want to talk about, who their offensive coordinator is, but they struggled in the first half. Good Lord, don't even get me started on Spencer McLaughlin's Oregon Ducks against Idaho Vandals from the FCS. Number 3 in the country preseason. Big Ten favorites as the new team. Their quarterback threw for nearly 400 yards. And they couldn't do anything. They couldn't run the ball in certain short-yarded situations. And this was a 3-point game late in the fourth quarter in Autzen, which is supposed to be one of the most daunting places to play. And Idaho came there and nearly took them down. Right? Like, Oregon struggled. And yes, it came down to some poor fourth down execution, but they struggled. Penn State, Drew Aller, a lot of completions, 216 yards, 3 tubs. He looked like the quarterback everybody's hyping him up to be in a true hostile road environment with a lengthy delay before the game came back to resume, but they had a big second quarter and coasted out in Morgantown. Michigan against UCLA's last game on the regular season, Fresno State, they struggled. Don't let the 20-point win fool you. This was a game in the balance late. 14 points by Michigan, because this was a run score game after Fresno State scored a touchdown to make it 16-10. Michigan State goes down, scores, and then a pick 6 deep into Michigan territory. The Wolverines turn it the other way. That makes Fresno State a tough team for UCLA to play against, but also makes you wonder, Michigan overrated as a top 10 team post Jim Harbaugh with their quarterback struggles? Iowa, 6-0 at the break. They won 40-0. We don't really know what the Cade McNamara team is going to look like under Kirk Ferentz, who, remember, had their head coach suspended, internal suspension for a recruiting violation. but he wasn't there week 1. You wonder how that changed in Iowa City. But UCLA plays Iowa. Is it Jekyll and Hyde? What's the team? Is it going to be the 40-point per game Iowa against a bad team or an FCS program, or is it the 6-0 in the first half Iowa team that couldn't score? Okay. You look at Maryland. They destroyed UConn. Poor Huskies. Purdue, 49-0. They destroyed Indiana State. What they're supposed to do. Indiana against Florida International, 21-7, coasted after the break, up by 14, scoring 10 second-half points. Makes you wonder if they're going to do a lot to a number against the Bruins, who have 2 weeks to prepare for the Hoosiers. And then you had Northwestern, who at home on their lakeside makeshift stadium won 13-6 against Miami of Ohio, including being tied 3-3 at the break and having to have a late defensive stop against Miami of Ohio in the fourth quarter on the lakeside. Okay? And that's a Northwestern team that surprised everybody, got a lot of wins last year. A lot of wins after they had to fire their head coach right before the season. Okay, that's a team that had a solid season last year in Northwestern. All right, so you see, week 1 struggles were part of the card. Now you look at Washington and SC, they got some dubs, and then Nebraska, Raiola looked good, 240 yards and 2 touchdowns. But big struggles across the country, even in the Big Ten, were the name of the game. So that is, I think, the positive moving forward for UCLA. They looked like a bad team in week 1. But doesn't everybody? And you look at everybody else, and you could point to nearly more than half of the Big Ten teams who had terrible starts, some of which either had to hold on for dear life or fight for victory from behind. And only Minnesota couldn't come away with a victory. So that's the positive moving forward, that UCLA still has winnable games on this schedule. They might be tough. They might be close. They might be eke it out, grind it out, last-minute finishes like the Hawaii game was, hopefully or in prettier fashion. But that's where there's hope. When you look around the Big Ten, the UCLA has to fix everything offensively. Protection, maybe they go to quick pass games, something that changes the run game, but that needs to be a quick fix immediately. Helped out by some better decision-making by Garbers, better play calls and route running in the second half for the Bruins. If they're that second half team, UCLA is closer to a 5-win team, borderline bowl team. If they're like the entire performance, more like the first half, then UCLA will be a total of a 2-3 win team. The adjustments were necessary and proven on the field, and I'm excited for what's to come for UCLA. Now, is it going to be ugly sweating it out for 3.5 hours like we did Saturday night? I hope not. But we'll find out, and we'll talk more about it moving forward on this podcast. So get your hands up. 8 clap time, baby. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. UCLA. UCLA. Fight, fight, fight. This has been Locked On UCLA. Download, like, subscribe. Thanks for your support. There's so much to talk about this season with this team. And we'll still talk about basketball too. So come back for more. This is Zach signing off. Go Bruins.